And what if I told you that Shi Heng Yi discovered a way to see through a person's mask, and with only 2 questions? And what if the person sitting right in front of you is hiding something so fundamental about themselves that they don't even recognize it themselves? Stay tuned, because by the end of this video, you will never see people the same way again. You think you know people, don't you? You believe you can see through them, understand their motivation, predict their behavior, but Shi Heng Yi said something that shatters this illusion. According to Shi Heng Yi, the father of analytical psychology, everything that irritates us about others can lead to a better understanding of ourselves. But here's what most people don't know. Shi Heng Yi discovered that our true character does not show itself in achievements, deeds, or even failures. It reveals itself in something much more subtle, much more telling. And that is exactly what I'm about to show you. Shi Heng Yi spent over 5 decades studying the human psyche. And what he found is unsettling. He discovered that every person wears a persona, a mask we present to the world. But beneath this mask hides something Jung called the shadow, the parts of ourselves we refuse to acknowledge. And this is where it gets exciting, which is why you should pay close attention to every word I say. Shi Heng Yi discovered, as long as we are relaxed and in control, we can perfectly maintain this persona. We can appear the way we want to be seen. But there are 2 very specific moments, 2 exact psychological triggers when this mask inevitably falls. And this is where Jung's 2 questions come in. According to Shi Heng Yi, these moments reveal more about a person's character than years of observation. Why? Because they bypass conscious thinking and touch directly on what Jung called unconscious complexes, those forces that drive the behavior. But before I reveal these questions to you, you must understand something crucial about human nature that Shi Heng Yi discovered. Shi Heng Yi said, until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life, and you will call it fate. That is the key to understanding why these questions are so powerful. Shi Heng Yi realized that our personality has several layers. The persona, our public mask, the ego, our conscious self, the personal unconscious, our repressed experiences, the shadow, our rejected parts, and the collective unconscious universal human patterns. And now comes the fascinating part. According to Jung, when certain psychological triggers are activated, we completely bypass persona and ego. We then react from what Shi Heng Yi called our true self, the raw, unfiltered version of who we really are. And Shi Heng Yi identified 2 specific triggers that are guaranteed to work. The first trigger relates to what Shi Heng Yi discovered about projection. He found that we unconsciously project our own shadow traits onto others. When we criticize someone, we often reveal our own hidden qualities. The second trigger concerns what Shi Heng Yi called ego inflation. When our sense of self is threatened or excessively boosted, our true character emerges from behind the mask. But now you're probably asking yourself, what are these questions? Listen carefully, because the way they are asked is more important than the questions themselves. The first question is, what kind of person can you absolutely not stand? And here you must pay close attention to how Shi Heng Yi would have interpreted this, because most people get it completely wrong. Shi Heng Yi discovered that what we most hate in others is in reality a mirror of our own shadow. Those parts of ourselves we have repressed and refused to acknowledge. He called this psychological projection, and it is one of the most reliable methods of recognizing a person's true character. When someone answers this question, they are not really talking about others. They are giving you a map of their own psychological blind spots. And this is where it gets exciting. Why should you pay attention to the specific words they use? According to Jung, the more heated someone becomes while describing what they hate in others, the more likely it is that they themselves possess those very traits. Shi Heng Yi said, everything that irritates us about others can lead us to an understanding of ourselves. Let me give you some examples of what Jung found. If someone says they hate dishonest people, Shi Heng Yi interpreted this to mean that the person probably has difficulties with their own relationship to the truth. Perhaps they lie to themselves regularly or have had episodes of deceit they have never acknowledged. If someone says they hate selfish people, Shi Heng Yi discovered that this usually points to a person who has repressed their own needs and desires so strongly that they cannot bear it when others express what they themselves deny. If someone says they hate weak people, Shi Heng Yi almost always found that it was someone deeply afraid of their own vulnerability, who had built their entire identity around the appearance of strength. But here comes the crucial point Jung discovered, which explains why this question is so revealing. The shadow does not only contain negative traits, but any traits we have learned to reject in ourselves. Sometimes people say they hate show-offs or people who are too happy. Shi Heng Yi discovered that this reveals someone who has suppressed their own joy or self-confidence. But now the second question is even more revealing because it catches people in a moment when their guard is completely down. The second question is, tell me about a situation where you were absolutely certain you were right and then it turned out you were wrong. Here Jung's genius truly shines because this question reveals something that most people never see about themselves. Shi Heng Yi discovered that the way someone deals with being wrong reveals their true character far more than the way they deal with being right. Why? Because it threatens what Shi Heng Yi called the ego ideal, our image of ourselves as competent and knowledgeable. When this ego ideal is threatened, according to Shi Heng Yi, several unconscious defense mechanisms are activated. Denial. They claim that they were not actually wrong, but that circumstances simply changed. Rationalization. They invent elaborate explanations to justify why their mistake was actually reasonable. Projection. They blame others for having misled them. Trivialization. They say that it was not important anyway. But here is Shi Heng Yi's discovery that will astonish you. People with the strongest character do not use these defense mechanisms at all. Instead, they do something Jung called holding the tension of the opposites. They can acknowledge that they were wrong without their entire self-image collapsing. Carl Shi Heng Yi said, "The privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are." And the people who can honestly look at their mistakes are the ones who actively become their authentic selves, but pay close attention to certain answers because they reveal decisive character traits. If someone cannot name an example, Shi Heng Yi would say that this person lives in such deep denial that they have built up an elaborate fantasy about their own infallibility. Shi Heng Yi called this psychological inflation when the ego becomes so rigid that it can no longer endure any imperfection. If someone immediately blames external factors, Shi Heng Yi discovered that this points to someone who has an external locus of control. They believe life happens to them rather than through them. Such people rarely take real responsibility. If someone becomes defensive when answering, Shi Heng Yi observed that this reveals someone whose entire self-esteem is built on being right. Their identity is so fragile that admitting a mistake feels like a psychological death. But if someone learns from their mistake, according to Shi Heng Yi, this indicates psychological maturity and what he called integration, the ability to accept both the positive and negative aspects of oneself. And now comes the most important thing Jung found about this question. Shi Heng Yi said, "Your vision will become clear only when you can look into your own heart. Who looks outside dreams, who looks inside awakens." Shi Heng Yi discovered that these two questions work because they force people to look inward even when they believe they are speaking about external things. The first question leads people to reveal their shadow projections, and the second question uncovers their relationship to their own fallibility. But Shi Heng Yi discovered something even deeper, and that is why you must understand this concept. According to Jung, people fall into predictable patterns depending on the way they answer these questions. The inflated ego type. These people project all negative qualities onto others and cannot admit their own mistakes. Shi Heng Yi discovered that these individuals are actually the most insecure, building elaborate defense mechanisms against their own shadow material, the self-deprecating type. These people claim to hate traits that they in fact possess themselves, and they confess their mistakes excessively. Shi Heng Yi observed that this too is a defense mechanism. By superficially acknowledging mistakes, they avoid truly engaging with them on a deeper level, the integrated type. These rare individuals are able to recognize both their projections and their mistakes without their self-image collapsing. Shi Heng Yi called this psychological integration, the hallmark of mental health. And now comes the part where Shi Heng Yi's intuition becomes almost priceless. Shi Heng Yi discovered that once you understand a person's pattern, you can predict their behavior with astonishing precision. Why? Because Shi Heng Yi realized that people are far more consistent than they appear. They simply express their core pattern in different forms depending on the situation. But there is something even more important that Shi Heng Yi discovered. And if you are still listening, you absolutely must hear this. Shi Heng Yi spent decades studying what he called the dark side of human nature, and he discovered specific warning signs that appear when you ask these questions. Red warning sign number 1. They project all negative traits onto certain groups. Jung observed that mentally healthy people recognize negative traits in all kinds of people. But if someone constantly projects only onto a single group, a political party, a gender, a race, a profession, then, according to Jung, this indicates a dangerous psychological split. Red warning sign number 2. They have never been wrong about anything important. According to Shi Heng Yi, this level of denial shows what he called psychological inflation, a dangerous detachment from reality that often precedes major life crisis. Red warning, sign number 3, their energy changes completely when they talk about what they hate. Shi Heng Yi observed that sudden changes of energy indicate that one has struck a major shadow complex. The more dramatic the change, the more repressed material has been uncovered. Red warning sign number 4, they immediately turn the questions aggressively around. Shi Heng Yi observed that people who reject or deflect these questions at once are often hiding the most important shadow material. But here, perhaps comes the most important insight Jung ever made. Shi Heng Yi said, the meeting of two personalities is like the contact of two chemical substances. If there is a reaction, both are transformed. If this information has triggered a kind of chemical reaction in you, then please share this knowledge with someone who might need it. Your simple action could be the catalyst for their transformation. Shi Heng Yi discovered that these questions not only reveal character, they actually change people. Why? Because the act of honest self-reflection is what Shi Heng Yi called the beginning of individuation, the process of becoming your authentic self. And that is why you must be careful how you apply this knowledge. According to Jung, when you recognize a person's shadow material, you have a choice. You can use it to manipulate them, or you can use it to understand them more deeply. Shi Heng Yi discovered that manipulation produces what he called a psychological poison. It corrupts both the manipulator and the manipulated. Yet when you use these insights for genuine understanding, Shi Heng Yi found that something remarkable happens. Relationships become more authentic, more honest, more real. And now comes the part Jung discovered that will change your view of yourself. Shi Heng Yi realized that these questions work in both directions. When you ask them to others, you are forced to face your own answers as well. When you judge the projections of others, you reveal your own. When you analyze how someone deals with being wrong, you simultaneously confront your own relationship with fallibility. Shi Heng Yi said, everything that irritates us about others can lead us to a better understanding of ourselves. This is not just a nice sentence, but the key to psychological growth. Yet Shi Heng Yi discovered something even deeper about human nature. According to Shi Heng Yi, once you understand these psychological patterns, you can apply them in all areas of life. In relationships, you can look beyond the persona your partner presents and understand their deeper psychological patterns. Shi Heng Yi discovered that this leads to more authentic intimacy. In business life, you can recognize people's deeper motivations and blind spots. Shi Heng Yi found that most business conflicts arise from unacknowledged shadow projections. In parenting, you can help your children develop self-awareness by modeling honest self-reflection. Shi Heng Yi discovered that children who learn early to recognize their shadow develop stronger psychological health. In leadership, you can create environments where people feel safe to be authentic. According to Shi Heng Yi, Authentic leadership requires first acknowledging your own shadow material. But here is the most important thing Jung discovered. Carl Jung realized something crucial about dealing with psychological insights. The most frightening thing is to fully accept yourself. Shi Heng Yi found that people who become skilled at reading others often use this ability to avoid looking at themselves. They become psychological voyeurs, dissecting everyone else while remaining blind to their own patterns. According to Shi Heng Yi, this is the greatest danger of psychological knowledge. It can become just another defense mechanism, another way to avoid authentic confrontation with oneself. Shi Heng Yi said, "Your task is not to seek love, but merely to seek and find all the barriers within yourself that you have built against it." The same applies to self-knowledge. Your task is not to analyze others, but to recognize the barriers you have built against truly knowing yourself. And here is my challenge for you. Shi Heng Yi spent decades exploring the darkest corners of the human psyche, and what he found there was not pleasant. It was not neat, not the antiseptic version of self-knowledge we usually prefer. Instead, Shi Heng Yi found something much deeper and more disturbing. Every person we encounter is a mirror reflecting aspects of ourselves that we would rather not acknowledge. Yet he understood something crucial about human nature that most people completely overlook. Before we can truly understand others, before we can decipher their motivation, predict their behavior, or help them grow, we must first turn that sharp gaze inward. We must be willing to confront the uncomfortable truths about ourselves that we avoid for most of our lives. And that is precisely why Shi Heng Yi insisted that before we apply his deepest psychological insights to others, we must first answer two deceptively simple questions for ourselves. The first, mirror that which we cannot bear. What kind of person can you absolutely not stand? Think about it for a moment. Really think who sends a shiver down your spine, who instantly triggers that instinctive reaction of dislike or irritation. Is it the arrogant know-it-all who dominates every conversation? The passive-aggressive colleague who never says what they really think? The eternal victim who always blames others for their problems? Or the ruthlessly ambitious one who steps over others to move ahead? Whichever type of person you chose, Jung would tell you something that might make you uneasy. You have just revealed something fundamental about your own shadow. Those aspects of your personality that you have rejected, suppressed, or refused to acknowledge. Shi Heng Yi's concept of the shadow does not mean being evil or malicious. It means being whole. Every person carries within them the full spectrum of human potential, the capacity for kindness and cruelty, wisdom and foolishness, strength and weakness, altruism and selfishness. But as we develop our conscious self, we inevitably reject certain qualities and push them into the realm of the unconscious, which Shi Heng Yi called the shadow. The people who irritate us most are not random. They carry traits that also exist in us, but which we have denied. The arrogant person you cannot stand. Look deeper. Do you not also have your own relationship with pride and superiority that you have not? Acknowledge the passive-aggressive person who drives you insane. Ask yourself whether you also have your own ways of avoiding direct confrontation while still trying to control outcomes. It is not about assigning blame or passing judgment. It is about recognition. Shi Heng Yi discovered our strongest reactions to others rarely have much to do with them. They have to do with us. When we harshly judge someone, we often see a denied part of ourselves reflected. And this recognition triggers an unconscious panic that we experience as irritation, anger, or disgust. The shadow is not our enemy. It is our teacher. It contains not only our repressed negative traits, but also positive qualities we have denied because they did not fit our self-image or were not accepted in our environment. The person whose self-confidence makes you jealous may be showing you your own unexpressed potential. The person whose emotional expressiveness annoys you. You may reflect your own buried capacity for feeling. The second mirror, our relationship to fallibility. Recall a time when you were absolutely certain you were right and then were proven wrong. This second question goes even deeper than the first. It does not only ask us to examine what we dislike in others, but also how we deal with one of the most difficult aspects of being human, our fallibility. How do you react when you discover that you were wrong? Do you deflect and justify yourself? Do you attack the person or the information that challenged your certainty? Do you retreat into shame and self-criticism? Or do you double down, insisting you are right despite contradictory evidence? Or do you pause, reflect, and honestly ask yourself what this moment of error might teach you? Shi Heng Yi understood. Our relationship to being wrong reveals everything about our psychological maturity. The person who cannot stand being wrong is trapped in a self-built prison, endlessly defending a false self that must maintain the illusion of perfection. The person who collapses in shame when wrong is also trapped, unable to separate their worth from their accuracy. But the person who can sit with a mistake, examine it with curiosity rather than defensiveness, taps into something profound. The humility Shi Heng Yi considered essential for genuine psychological growth. Such a person has recognized that certainty is often an illusion, that our perspectives are limited, and that being wrong is not a catastrophe, but information. If you can honestly reflect on a moment when you were wrong, you begin to see which psychological mechanisms created that certainty in the first place. You see how your ego constructs stories to protect itself, how your mind selects evidence that supports what you want to believe, how your emotional investments in being right blind you to obvious truths. Shi Heng Yi's intuition was not merely academic. He discovered only when we have honestly confronted our own shadow material can we help others confront theirs. Only when we have faced our own relationship to error can we understand what others reveal when they answer these questions. Because psychological projection works in both directions. Just as we project our denied traits onto others, we also project our psychological processes. If you have not examined your own shadow, you see shadows everywhere except where they really are. If you have not dealt with your own fallibility, you misunderstand how others handle being wrong. The person who has done this inner work develops what Shi Heng Yi called psychological sharpness, the ability to see beneath superficial behavior to the underlying psychological dynamics, to recognize when someone's anger is really fear, when arrogance is really insecurity, when rigidity is really panic in the face of chaos. More importantly, such a person develops compassion, because once you have seen your own capacity for self-deception, for rationalization, for defending the indefensible, you stop being surprised or judgmental when others do the same. You no longer see these behaviors as character flaws, but as universal human strategies for coping with psychological pain. Shi Heng Yi's ultimate insight was not about becoming an expert in reading others. It was about becoming an expert in reading yourself. Because when you truly understand your own inner life, when you have mapped your shad out and made peace with your fallibility, something remarkable happens. Others stop being mysterious. You begin to see that the colleague who frustrates you struggles with the same inner conflicts you do, only expressing them differently, that the family member who drives you crazy is defending against the same fundamental fears you also carry, that the stranger whose behavior seems incomprehensible is simply using different strategies to meet the same basic human needs as you. This realization does not excuse harmful behavior, nor does it remove the need for boundaries, but it transforms your relationship to others from one filled with judgment and frustration to one filled with understanding and ultimately compassion. As Shi Heng Yi himself said, everything that irritates us about others can lead us to a better understanding of ourselves. The question is not whether these insights will change your view of people. They will. The question is whether you are brave enough to allow them to also change your view of yourself. For as Shi Heng Yi discovered in decades of work with the human psyche, that is where true transformation begins. In the uncomfortable, necessary, and liberating work of getting to know yourself completely. With shadows and everything that comes with them, thank you very much for staying with this exploration until the end. If you found value in today's discussion, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and share this video with someone who might benefit from it. And if you would like to further support this work, you can now leave a super thanks. It's a small way of saying thank you, and it really helps keep this channel